Hi, this is Harry Guinness from Make Use Of, and in this article, I'm going to show you how to make this spooky picture with the doll holding a hammer trying to kill me. For information on how I shot this and stuff like that, you can check out the written post that accompanies this screencast. This screencast is going to focus on the Photoshop process. So the first thing you need to do is load the files. So you can either take your own photos or you can use the photos I've provided. So to load them, go to File, Scripts, and then Load Files into Stack. Browse to where you've got your images, and I'm going to load 3, 4, and 5 doll into Photoshop. I want to automatically align the source images so they line up, and click OK. And then we're going to break down what we've got once they're loaded up. Okay, now I know the order I want them in is 3 on the bottom, and then 4, and then 5. So let's look at them one at a time. So 3 is our base plate, and I shot this myself. This is a little easier if you've got a friend, because then you don't necessarily have to hold the doll yourself. So this is me lying in bed, holding the doll one-handed. Then the next plate is me just lying in bed. So we're going to take this bit of the bed and blend it over the top there. We're going to ignore this hand, so we're going to be mixing these two plates so that we lose this bit of me holding the doll. And then the top one is me holding the doll from behind with the hammer. So we're going to blend in quite a bit of this doll. So that's not aligned where we want it at the moment, but we'll position that later on. So to start with, I'm going to crop this. I'm going to zoom out, grab the crop tool with the C, and then we'll go with the original ratio. Select that from the crop tool, and then just drag in here. So we don't want some of that stuff on top. We want all my head. So something like that. If you're familiar with rules of compositions like the rule of thirds, this looks pretty good because that's putting my face on a third, and baby and the hammer will roughly, or the doll and the hammer rather, will roughly end up on a third as well. I'm going to turn off those two layers, and we're going to look at this base plate. So I want to hide this arm and introduce it. Other than that, there's not a lot I want from this one. So I'm going to add a layer mask. I'm going to hold down the Alt or Option key if you're on a PC to fill that layer mask with black as I do it. You should be familiar with layer masks if you played around with the other articles in this series on spooky images. And then I'm going to grab the brush tool, and I'm going to set my flow to about 20%. So I'm going to hold down Shift and then push on the 2 key. And then I'm going to push the 0 key to set my opacity to 100%. And I want to make sure I've got a nice soft edge brush. So I'm going to click on soft round there. And then painting with white is going to reveal the layer below. So I'm just going to zoom in a bit again. And then I'm just going to start painting in with white. Got to push X to swap my swatches so that I've got white on top. Just start painting in this duvet so we can see what we've got. And something like that. We're going to be hiding that bit of the doll with the next plate up. And so we want to look at this shoulder here because we don't want to lose my shoulder into that. So I want to use this edge to blend the two together. So that's that edge introduced. I'm going to swap to black with X and then just paint away here. Now I want to harden up the edge of this brush. So somewhere around 60-70% is just going to allow me to paint a little closer here and paint away like this. So we're just introducing this edge here. You can zoom right in, even up to the pixel values, and you're just working both sides of this edge, swapping white to introduce a bit more of the duvet, and then black to introduce my shoulder back in. And I can see, I think we've got a little bit of weird stuff going on in there. And zoom back out, and let's have a look at that. Turn that off, turn that back on, and that looks good. That's the arm hidden. This bit here we're going to fix with the next layer up. So again, off, on. You can see through a little bit there potentially. Might be a bit of weird stuff there. X, yeah, you can just slightly see my arm there, so just make sure I'm going over to get 100% blending on the mask there. And yeah, that looks pretty good. So that's just really simple, really easy, a little bit on there, and you can spend as much or as little time as you like. That actually looks good close up. It just looks a little weird from where I'm sitting. You can spend as much or as little time as you want working the edges like that. Something like this duvet, because it's got that nice edge there, it was really, really simple to do. The next bit's going to be a little bit harder. So I'm going to turn that on, select it, and I'm going to reduce the opacity down to about 50%. Zoom in, and then we need to position this plate so that it aligns with where we want the baby to be. So grab the V key, I'm going to move this back, and the baby's at a different angle, or the doll rather, so we're not going to align everything perfectly, but I'm looking at where this bath coat is, and I know I'm going to be blending this edge here with this edge here. So something like that. Then we've got this duvet coming down. I'm just going to cover my hand up a bit more, I think, maybe. Yeah, somewhere about there should give us something to work with. We're going to be going back and refining these masks more as we go along. Turn that up to 100%, and then add a black layer mask holding down the Alt or Option key. This is a little bit more advanced masking than what we were doing in some of the earlier articles, but it's still following the same principles. So you should start with maybe the first Ghosts one before trying some of the more advanced masking in this, but it is kind of easy, and because of the rough textures that we're working with here, you can get away with quite a lot. So let's start painting in. This hammer's a good place. Now there's a slight difference in color there, which we'll address in a second by feathering that blend a little bit better. And what are we looking at when we blend these? So let's have a look there. So we're just looking, zoom in. So we're going to blend this edge into there. And paint away on the other side. And that's just adding that arm in there. So we're going to be working back and forth on all these different edges to just introduce what we want to introduce. So what have we got up here? Okay, so let's add that. Oops, accidentally moved it. So let's add that in there. So I'm gonna paint with black in here, and then we're gonna go in close, and then we're gonna paint white in here, and then we're just blending black so that it looks like it's coming over. Keep that edge, and a little bit too much green for my liking there. Zoom back out, and there's no edge. A little bit more tweaking as we go, and we'll tidy that up, but that just looks like it's part of the duvet. So we're going to work over here, painting in white, and that's the baby arm there. Good, that's the doll arm, so there's no hand or anything weird going on there. And then we're going to paint all this in here, and let's see what we've got. Now, we don't want as much duvet as we have there, I don't think. This edge is all good. So this is all good there, but we don't want too much of this. Let's work with this edge here. So we obviously don't want my hand in. So let's start by painting that away. So swap to black and just paint that away. So we're working with this edge of the doll down to here. We don't want any of this. That's all an arm. So we're going to use this edge of the duvet and just paint along here like this. We're going to use that as our new edge, and just letting that feather help along there. I'll come back in and fix that in a second. So we're going to use that edge down to all the way down to the edge here, I think. And zoom in. So paint away that, and using that, paint away there. Zoom out and have a look at roughly what we're doing. So I need to tidy up that edge, obviously, but this is beginning to take shape. Once that's tidied up, it's going to look a lot cleaner. So, going to swap to white with the X key and start painting back in that harder edge. So we don't want to go too far with it. So we're just going to work back and forth, swapping from white to black on that edge. Remember from the last tutorial, I used the pen tool to get a really good firm edge. We could use that again here, but I'm happy just to work away with the brush tool like this. This is a sort of natural blending edge, so I don't particularly need to dive in and make sure it's very, very straight. I can get away with being a little bit rougher than I could when I'm blending two different edges, something that's a lot less, I don't want to say organic because it's a duvet, not some sort of plant or flower, but it is quite an organic shape. It's just falling naturally. You've just got these ripples, and you can do what you want with them, really. You know, I'm just using one ripple that wasn't an edge as an edge, and it sort of just works out. So, right now, this is the sort of job that if you're doing this yourself, you can spend as much or as little time as you like. Turn that off and on. You can see we're adding all this in. I want to actually bring some of that back in over here. So swap to black. I kind of like this edge being in here. Turn this off and on. See if I can work that edge in. Maybe that's a little bit higher. Don't think. Pull that edge down. You know, you're just looking at where you can play around. You can also use other tools in Photoshop. No, I think I'm happy enough with this. If I was doing this for myself, I would probably spend another little bit of time on this, possibly liquefying and mixing in some other tools. Unfortunately, watching me do that for an hour and a half isn't going to be a great learning experience, so we're going to gloss over that. So if you want to spend more time working this edge, making these blend so that they blend really perfectly, as that is, we're going to throw in some color and contrast and stuff over the top, so any little subtle variations in color aren't going to be noticeable. But if you want to spend more time on that, I recommend that you do when you're working on it. You can spend as long or as short as you want. So I just want to work on the hammer edge here. I just want to soften up that soften up that brush rather, so that I can just soften that edge. I'm going to lower that opacity down to say 30%, and that way we can just paint with a soft edge brush here, and it just removes that little hard bit which is on that color edge there. So zoom out, pressing Command 0 to fill it. We have this little edge issue there, so I'm just going to grab the crop tool again and pull in a little bit. Unfortunately, it's snapping, so I've got to zoom in so that we're not snapping too close to my head. And yeah, that'll do. Push return, zoom out to fit, and that's looking really good. So if I turn this layer off and this layer off, you can see what we're doing. We're covering my arm there, and then we're adding in this hammer and this bit which is hiding my hand even more. So that looks really good. And the next thing to do then is to tie this all together by making sure there's a color over the top, there's contrast over the top. I shot this at about 10 in the morning, and I kind of like it to look like it was more of a moonlight scene. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a hue or saturation adjustment layer, and then I'm going to grab this target adjustment tool, click on my face, and that should select the reds, and I'm just going to pull this down to about -44 or something like that. There's much too much red in that for what's going to be a night scene. Turn that off, turn that on, and you can see that that's really killing out those reds in a way that's going to allow the blues and stuff to become much more effective. Next, I want to use a interesting Photoshop layer. It's called a color lookup adjustment layer. Now, this is something that's going to be a lot more familiar to videographers than photographers. It's fairly new in Photoshop, but you can load 3D LUT files, and it also comes with some in Photoshop. And if you click on these, you get these LUT files. And what these do is they replace colors with other colors, similar to the gradient overlay or the gradient adjustment layer, which I'll also use again in a second. And one of these is Moonlight. So I'm going to select that, and you can see that there's a lot of blues introduced. There's it's darkened, and you can see that actually looks kind of like Moonlight. So these are quite familiar to videographers. They're used a lot in video editing for color grading, but they're not so much used by photographers, but they're now accessible in Photoshop, and I really like them. I think they're something that's well worth playing with. Now, the effect it's having here is a bit strong. We want to be able to see what's happening. We're going to actually make the baby's eyes glow red. So I'm going to pull this opacity back. Somewhere around 40 or 50% is probably going to introduce the colors and darkening that we want at the moment without going too over the board. Yeah, so that looks pretty good. I also want to introduce some more blues into the shadows. I want to control the colors a little bit more myself. So if you remember from the first of the articles in this series, we use a gradient map. So I'm going to use one of them again, gradient map adjustment there, select it. And that's not the gradient map I want to use at all. Click in here to get to the gradient editor. Double click on this bottom stop. Now again, the colors I know because I played around with them before. So I'm just going to dial in the values. But what I'm looking for is a deep dark blue. So the values I want here are 226 for the hue and 81 for the saturation, and then 16 for the brightness. That's this nice navy sort of color. And then click OK. Then for the highlight color, again, I know it. I want a sort of cream like the Moonlight. So it's got a hue of 35, saturation of 9, and then a brightness of 100. And that's that nice cream color. Click OK. And you can see that we've got blues in the shadows, this cream in the highlights. And I just want to drag this over a little bit so that we're getting a bit more blue through the image, and what Photoshop, undo that, what Photoshop is considering the highlights is a little less. There we go. And happy with that, click OK. So that actually looks really good. If I was doing a sort of monotone thing, I'd use this. But I'm going to change the blend mode down to color. We only want it affecting the color values of the image. And I'm also going to pull the opacity down. We want this adding color, but we don't want to completely change the colors. Somewhere 20 to 30% is going to introduce those blues and creams without going too far. And that looks really good. With everything we've done so far, this image is beginning to look a little bit dark. So I'm going to grab a curves adjustment there. And then I'm just going to lift up the midtones a little bit. So click there. And then pull down, because we don't want to push up too much on the highlights. And turn that off and on. Pull back the opacity a bit on that, maybe about 75%. And I like the effect that's having. That's making it look like the Moonlight's a bit brighter. But, you know, we can still see what's happening. This doesn't look like it was shot at 10 a.m. Or at least it doesn't obviously look like it was shot at 10 a.m. There is the suggestion that this was shot at night. Now, so far that doll is looking creepy because all dolls look creepy, but I think some glowing red eyes would go a long way towards making it even creepier. So I'm going to zoom in, Command 1, zoom in to 100%, use spacebar and then this to drag around. And I want to make those eyes bright red. So I'm going to do this with a hue saturation adjustment layer. Click it up. And then I want to crank the hue all the way up. Or rather, first I need to take colorize because we want to make sure that everything's getting colored. Then drag the hue all the way to the other side. Saturation all the way up to 100%, I think. And lightness somewhere around there. Looks pretty good. This obviously looks awful because it's affecting the whole image, but where I'm looking now is on the eyes, and that looks good. I'm going to change the blend mode from normal down to color, and you can see we keep all the details in the eyes. So I'm going to hold down Command and then delete, backspace on a PC to add the layer mask. I'm going to grab the brush tool, make it nice and small, and then I'm just going to start to paint this in to the eyes like this, just painting around the eye, making sure not to go too far over the middle. You can always switch to black on the layer mask, which we'll do in a second because you can see I'm going over on a couple of places. Switch to black, paint away on the edge there. So just working back and forth as you do with every layer mask to paint in the effect you want. Make it a little bit smaller because we've got this angle here we got to close out. Going back and forth, back and forth. It's can be a little time consuming to get these things right, but it's also quite satisfying when you get it down. So there, and I think paint away there, and turn that off, and I'll zoom out to 100%, and that looks pretty good. We've got these weird glowing red eyes. They're very, very spooky. Now, the thing is, if these eyes were really glowing, they would be introducing some color to the rest of the image. So that's what we're going to do now. So I'm going to grab a new layer, Command-Shift-N, or Control-Shift-N if you are on a PC. Select OK. And I'm going to double-click here to add a new swatch. And then I want to add a nice red color that's going to match them. And because I was messing around with this earlier, I've got one that kind of works, maybe a little more saturated, a little brighter, something like this. Select OK. And then I'm going to hold down Option Delete and just fill the layer with this color. Then I'm going to change the blend mode from normal to soft light. And that's much too much. So lower the opacity to 35, 40%, 45%. And we don't want it affecting everything. If you look at where the eyes are, they're not on the back of the baby's head, or the doll's head. So I'm going to add a layer mask. I'm just going to click, not going to hold down Option, because I want to add, no, actually, I'm going to paint in the color rather than paint it away. So I'm going to fill that with black, hold down Option, delete, grab the brush tool. I want to make sure my brush is nice and soft again. I've been painting with some hardness, so yep, nice and soft. And make a nice big brush. Switch to white. Possibly 30% flow, 20% is probably going to be pretty good here. So then we want to just start painting in some of this color. And you can see it will start to get added in to areas like this. And the closer to the eyes, the more color you want. So you're kind of painting this sort of cone in. You know, you don't want to be too much into these deep crevices at the back of the duvet here because no light is going to reach them. And the same down here, you know, you paint away a little bit here, but the doll is obviously staring at me, so we want quite a bit of fall off here. We want some on the hammer because the eyes are there, on the doll's face, on the wall over here. And so that layer mask starts to look pretty good. So if you turn this off and back on, you can see where the color is being added. Now we can increase that. It starts to look a little bit weird. It's kind of discoloring the wall behind. So I might try color blend mode. That looks even weirder. I think soft light and just pull that opacity down a little bit, 30%, and then mask away some of this stuff on the wall there. is gonna give the best results. We're getting this little red glow from the eyes that's adding in. Again, if you want to spend the real time doing this, you can make sure that you're going in and masking it so that it's only falling on the highlights. If this was something you were doing for a commercial project, you would paint in the red on the right hand side of all the crevices in the duvet and not on the left edges, and that would be very, very time consuming for what makes very little difference to this sort of image. Now the final thing I want to do is I want to add some cool black eyes, or rather some dead black eyes to this doll. There's a bit of discussion as to whether it should have glowing red eyes or dark black eyes, and so I'm going to show how to do both. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to group these two layers together with Command or Control G, and I'm going to call this red eyes. I'm going to twirl open that group, and then I'm going to duplicate this hue saturation layer because we've already got the mask on it, drag it to the top, and then I'm going to turn off red eyes. So we've got this hue saturation layer masked in, adding the red. Double click, and then I'm going to drag the lightness all the way down and the saturation all the way down. And then we're going to change the blend mode from color to normal. Zoom in so we can get a better look at what's happening over here. And it's a bit too strong, so we're going to pull that back down to about 80%, and it's giving that dead black eyes. Zoom out, and yeah, that looks kind of horrifying. If this had more of a close-up of the baby, I'd probably go with these dead black eyes. I quite like the effect. They're kind of spooky. But because you can't see the baby too much, and the black eyes like that kind of just look like they're the shadows are a bit crushed in them, rather than we're actually seeing dead black eyes in the doll. I'm going to turn that off and turn red eyes. You know, this really makes it obvious that the doll is kind of terrifying and weird. So you can choose whichever you want. If you can see the doll better, maybe you've gone with a daylight scene or a brighter moonlight scene or something like that, I'd go with the black eyes. Otherwise, I would stick with the red eyes, add in the red glow. And this is the final image. We started with this base plate, added in the next layer, hiding my arm. Then we worked in the hammer, worked on this edge here, and then we just added all the color layers, which really made everything come together. You know, as I said, any color differences over here don't matter once you add in all these layers on top. Then we gave the doll these glowing red and terrifying eyes. This article, the Photoshop works a little bit tougher than what has been in the other articles in this series, but it uses the exact same techniques. So if you want a little bit of a challenge and you've worked through the simpler ghost ones, maybe you're a little bit familiar with the pen tool, then doing something like this, where you're blending different edges together, can be a really great way to push and develop your Photoshop skills. For more information on how I shot everything and a refresher of the steps, check out the accompanying written post. Thanks for watching.